3:10 a.m., 21st September, 2025. In the darkness above Crimea, a Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 drone picked up an unusual signal. 2 heat signatures, sharp and steady. Within seconds, its AI flagged the source. Those were 2 Russian Mi-8 AMT helicopters, freshly landed on a military airfield deep inside occupied territory. Inside Ukraine's underground UAV command room in Zaporizhzhia, the feed went live. Operators leaned closer. No one spoke because everyone knew this meant a clean target, high value, and completely exposed. One hit here wouldn't just take out helicopters, it would disrupt an entire regional supply chain. The Mi-8s had just completed a 2-hour troop flight. Their crews had stepped off, relaxed, trading jokes and pouring quick shots of vodka. They thought the night was quiet. They didn't know that this routine landing had given Ukraine something priceless, the exact coordinates of one of Russia's most guarded air bases. And within minutes, that base would turn into ashes. At 3:20 a.m., minutes after the 2 Mi-8s had touched down, the Gore Command Center in Zaporizhzhia began to flash. Commercial infrared satellites had caught the ramp still glowing from hot engines. That single thermal bloom changed everything. A Bayraktar TB2 on patrol was retasked and dropped low. It descended to 1,650 feet, skimmed the terrain, and slipped through the blind sector that the Nebo-U and Podlet-K1 couldn't cover. Its composite airframe returned on enemy radar like a small bird. On their scopes, it was almost invisible. The drone's electro-optical and infrared sensors traced the residual heat on the ramp and relayed video to the UAV command in Zaporizhzhia. The footage made the picture clear. This was not a temporary refueling stop. At least 2 Mi-8 AMTs were staged for redeployment. 2 B-12s sat on the far edge, marked for maritime reconnaissance. Behind the aircraft lay a cluster of Nebo-U antennas, long-range early warning arrays capable of detecting low observable targets and tracking hundreds of returns at once. Human intelligence filled in the rest. Hundreds of tons of aviation fuel, stacked ammunition, and maintenance stocks large enough to sustain continuous sorties. If that airfield were neutralized, Russia would lose a critical node. Early warning would weaken, the logistics chain would fracture, and air defenses would be stretched thin. Follow-on strikes would open new corridors. There was no time to waste. Ghost, the special task unit on station, escalated the mission from surveillance to strike. Surveillance assets that had been sitting covertly for nearly 2 hours received the order to vector into the final corridor. Coordinates had been verified in less than 5 minutes. By 3:25 a.m., the formation was within 25 miles of the target. 2 UJ-22 decoy UAVs led the approach at 985 feet, built large enough and fitted to broadcast strong signals across the 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz bands. They were unarmed and made to look loud on radar, deliberate bait. Exactly 656 feet behind the decoys, 3 Lutan, 1-9, 6 attack UAVs held formation low at roughly 490 feet, cruising between 112 to 124 miles per hour. Each carried a 165-pound shaped charge. Their guidance ran on GPS-independent and radio-silent internal navigation suites. The plan generated no open band control traffic from launch. It was mimicking a choreography, where decoys draw fire and the main bodies slip beneath the rescan arcs. At 3:27 a.m., the 2 UJ-22s crossed into the first recognition zone. A Podlet-K1 station over 12.5 miles out flagged anomalous mid-altitude contacts. The Nebo-U woke and swept high-frequency cones across widening arcs. The decoys sharpened on displays at 900 to 1,000 feet, closing at about 11.5 miles. The local assessment labeled them as loitering kamikaze, or recon UAVs, preparing to strike. Condition 1 was declared. A Pantsir S-1 battery on the airfield's eastern perimeter engaged, firing a full intercept salvo. In 14 seconds, 2 flashes lit the sky, and wreckage fell less than 1,650 feet from the fence. The duty officer reported the immediate threat neutralized. Podlet reverted to routine patrol. Nebo-U kept sweeping, but throttled back the southeast sector. The defenders had bought themselves a pause. They never knew the main attack was already lining up. As the Nebo beams swung northwest, the 3 Lieutenant 196s pressed deeper. The leader made a shallow 10-degree break off axis. The wing elements held formation and cut altitude below 330 feet, hugging the tree line on the base's southern edge. They moved through a razor-thin window, intersecting nulls between 2 sweep arcs, a side lobe gap wide enough to transit and clear before radars could relock. This was deliberate radar-evasion craft, the same technique that had let Ukrainian UAVs push into distant airspace in other operations. While Pantsir crews re-zeroed, the dagger tip had already pierced the outer layer. Distance to the field dropped below 10 miles. At the current speed, the strike would reach the ramp in under 5 minutes. 2 minutes later, the Lieutenant trio entered the attack corridor together. Range control confirmed movement. Lucci units entered the attack corridor. Lock heading: Crimea base, Mi-8 cluster, B-12S, Nebo-U. Infrared on the control screens showed 2 Mi-8s were parked exposed on the west ramp, and 2 B-12S sat at the hangar edge. The radar cluster was uncamouflaged. The base had not yet perceived the true threat. The strike elements were ground-hugging and locking 3 lethal nodes at once. At 3:33:45 a.m., Nebo-U registered an ultra-low faint return, a dim heat band skimming the screen edge. The sector coordinator announced accelerating low-level contacts and raised alert level 2. It was already too late. In the control center, Ukrainian engineers armed the terminal in dive mode. Automatic final dive guidance locked to pre-designated aim points. The 3 Lieutenant bird shapes accelerated into their terminal runs, pushing to 145 to 155 miles per hour. Each airframe measured around 5 feet in fuselage length and a 7-foot wingspan, built from carbon composite to cut weight and radar cross-section. These UAVs were optimized so that a single hit could trigger cascading destruction. 30 seconds later, the first Lieutenant began a pull-up to 600 feet and dove on the west ramp. Another peeled off to strike the Nebo-U array, the third angle for the B-12 cluster and fuel servicing points. Behind those targets lay an expeditionary fuel dump of over 1,100,000 pounds of aviation fuel and dispersed ammunition stores. Ignition here would set off chain detonations. The strike was timed and precise. The formation executed the final seconds exactly as rehearsed. The rest was about to unfold. By 3:40 a.m., the airfield was unrecognizable. Fires raged across the western ramp. The heat distorted satellite feeds, producing a single pulsing bloom that spread wider every minute. The ground sensors had stopped transmitting. Only the flames sent a signal now. 2 minutes later, a Ukrainian reconnaissance satellite captured the first full-spectrum thermal image. The bright spot stretched more than 1,000 feet across, with a visible temperature exceeding 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire technical zone was burning. At 3:45 a.m., Ukrainian field monitors received fragmented Russian transmissions. One message repeated twice. Fuel storage hit, personnel casualties high. Then nothing. The secondary explosions began soon after. Ammunition bunkers detonated one by one, scattering fragments across the perimeter. Each blast sent a fresh plume of smoke into the upper air. Fuel trucks turned into orange fireballs. The shockwaves rippled through nearby warehouses, caving in roofs and walls. By 4 a.m., the base was out of communication. Russian command relays in northern Crimea tried to re-establish contact, but every node was silent. For the first time since the war began, there was no radar coverage across the peninsula's northwest approach. Commercial satellite operators began to notice the glow. Civilian infrared platforms logged it as a major industrial fire before any official reports came in. Telegram feeds from nearby towns started filling with videos of orange skies, shaking windows, and fragments falling from above. The residents of Jankoy described it as the night the air turned red. At 4:15 a.m., independent analysts pulled the first high-resolution satellite pass from West Crimea. The evidence was undeniable. 3 Mi-8s were reduced to burned-out shells. One B-12 was almost unrecognizable. The Nebo-U radar went twisted and lifeless. The ramp, blackened for nearly 1,000 feet, was still smoldering. Damage estimates passed $180 million. Every operational helicopter and reconnaissance aircraft at the site was destroyed. The fuel reserves were gone. The main radar coverage grid had a 90-kilometer blind sector extending west, a gap Ukraine could now exploit for follow-on operations. Russian logistics officers scrambled to reroute resupply flights from Kherson and Jankoy. The changes increased transit times and exposed convoys to longer windows of detection. Crimea's southern command suddenly faced a gap it couldn't close quickly. By sunrise, the scale of the strike was confirmed. The base had ceased to exist as a functioning installation. The burn scar was visible from orbit. The loss wasn't just material, it was systemic. Air operations halted, early warning coverage dropped, and the command structure was forced to reorganize overnight. For Ukraine, it was more than a tactical win. It was a change in the rhythm of the war. 3 drones had done what weeks of artillery could not. They had created a silence of a kind that follows precision. Moscow's Ministry of Defense delayed its comment for almost 10 hours. When it came, the statement was short. A technical fire occurred at a Crimean facility. Cause under investigation. The truth was already public. Satellite images had circulated across every open-source intelligence network. Before and after mosaics showed the burned crater where the airfield once stood. The coordinates, once secret, were now archived online for everyone to see. It was a single coordinated strike that dismantled a defensive node in under 7 minutes. For Ukraine's command teams, the operation was complete, while for Russia, it was a blind spot where their early warning once stood. Granted, Operation Ghost wasn't the largest strike of the war, but it may have been the cleanest. What do you think? Was this victory born from technology, or did timing play its role? Share your thoughts below. If you want to see what happens when the next silence breaks, stay with us for the next mission.